They came for the tower just after 3. I know the time because my watch stopped at 3:17 a.m. when the power flicked and the blinking LED over the radar panel went flat. And because the clock on the old wall radio still showed the minute it lost signal, 0317, etched into the thing like a wound. I was already awake. Nights up there are long and thin, a string of small noises stretched taut under the sky. You learn the breathing of the place. Tree creaks, the far river like a slow machine, the single cricket that lives under the porch. That night the breathing changed. There was a sweetness under the cold, like cut flowers left too long in a jar. It should have been pretty. It wasn't. The scratching started at the eaves, soft at first, like wind teasing twigs. Then something tapped the wooden ladder below the loft, a dry, precise rapping that said unmistakably someone was trying the lock. I told myself for a moment it was raccoons, too small, too familiar. But then a sound, thick and wrong, a slow dragging, moved across the roof. I breathed in, and the smell rose, the sweet rot that would become our marker. Not the earthy rot of melting leaves, but flowers that had been boiled and let sit. Sickly, cloying. It filled the room, and my mouth tasted metal. "Hey," I whispered, "because that's the thing you do. You say something into the dark and hope it remembers you for later." Whoever was out there, it answered by calling my name, the way a parent does from another room. Soft, patient, like an offer. Not a person. It wasn't a voice shaped by throat and teeth. It was the idea of my name, pressed against the wood. A hollow echo that fit the letters, but not the living heat behind them. My skin crawled. I have been trying to write this down in order, because that was the promise I made more than once. To leave records, to make sense of what happened. It's a small comfort that people who come after might follow some breadcrumbs. But the truth is, memory unravels. It pulls at itself where it aches. So I will start with the night, because that's the moment the rules began to mean something. There were rules taped by the telephone, small print instructions from a man named Bryce Peterson, who had signed off on every override, every automated stream. Stewardship protocols. Do not engage. Do not sound the horn except as last resort. Maintain minimal EM output. Rules etched to stop us from doing what curiosity makes us do. The irony is obvious now. At the time, it felt like simple occupational safety, the kind you get before you climb a ladder in a storm. Stick to the rules, you stay alive. Break them, you draw attention. I had taken the Alberta lookout job because I thought being alone would be a kind of clearing. Time to sober up, to work, to get out of the mess I'd been in. It was only a summer contract. Man the tower, keep the logs, report anomalous readings to Central. The system. Her name appears on memos with a title that doesn't do her justice. Regional Containment Liaison. And yet, in person, she is only 50, her hair pulled back in an impatient knot, the skin around her eyes like mapped riverbeds. She apologized once for how cold the directive seemed. "We make choices so people can live," she said. "Sometimes we choose the lesser harm. Stick to the protocols, Hunter. please. Terry came up for setup with a transport van and a face sun-browned and soft-edged in a way city workers aren't. He is the one who taught me how to tune the boosters and how not to stare at the antler lights when they appear. Terry's hands know muscle memory, how to unzip a sensor pouch, how to twist a cable back into life. He'd done field work his whole life, and the mountain kept a record on him. A scar behind one ear, calloused index fingers, a few too many evenings with not enough sleep. He told stories, quiet, respectful stories, about past wildness, about animals that know how to watch and wait. Between Janet's directives and Terry's practicality, there was an honest friction. Janet wanted rules enforced. Terry wanted options in the field. I learned to translate both into action. Project Frequency itself was presented to us as a stabilization study. The explanatory documents, when they were finally released in classified bundles to our cabin, sounded like a hopeful frat of engineers and ecologists. Scientists convinced they could harness a particular EM signature to monitor migratory patterns, to reduce wildfire risk, to map subterranean water. They called it a non-invasive active monitoring protocol. In internal notes, however, the language dampened into something else. Words like entrainment and feedback loop cropped up. A few memos used the phrase spectral attractors. I read the line items and the budget spreadsheets and the recorded meetings and felt the teeth of the project. There were the predictable slides. Pulses alter behavior. Frequencies coax species into certain reaction patterns. But in one of Bryce's later emails, a line is underlined. Unintended attractor response in non-target biome. Someone scribbled in the margin, assess for anthropogenic cues. Bryce's voice came to me over and over in fragments. Terse, technical explanations. A man trying to be precise in the face of an expanding problem. He was hot for discovery. His notes had that hunger. A scientist enchanted by the look of something new in the data. He also left protocols for lookouts, protocols that were blunt and oddly compassionate. We are not experimenting on people, one memo reads. This is containment with observation. Another note, scribbled in a shaky hand and stuck in the logbook, if they are learning, then withdraw, record, do not feed. But the thing about rules is they are written by people. People get tired, people get curious, people get sloppy. And machines, once set into motion, don't remember the reasons for their impulses. It began, at first, as anomalies on the sensor arrays, faint spikes at odd harmonics that meant nothing to the automated baseline. The boosters hummed in the tower like small hearts, lights pulsing to carry our watch farther down the ridge. The booster's LEDs blinked in the night, and I could read the rhythm like a second language. Those lights are useful. They let us see the reach. But they are also a promise, and promises attract things. The creatures, they, is the only pronoun that fits and the most unsatisfying, are tall and impossibly thin. I have never gotten a good look in daylight. They don't like it. At night, they are shadows that do a small kind of wrongness to the air around them. They have something like antlers, bones or light or both, that stick out in angles from their heads and catch the moon like a badly set crown. When they move, the air shivers. They are attracted to electromagnetic activity. Where a phone pings, where a booster blinks, they gather, patient and cold as an ambush. They do not charge like predators, they edge and wait, testing the rules, testing sensors, learning to feed on the inevitability of human fixes. The first night we realized they adapted was not the night the tower was assaulted. It was 2 weeks prior, when a sensor went dead and then turned on again. And on the playback we saw a thin black smear at the lens, like a finger wiping glass. The audio on that clip is full of high-frequency clicks I still cannot render into English. Someone wrote musicality of approach on a lab note and smiled nervously. There is something in the way they respond to patterns. Where you pulse light, they map it. Where you hum, they answer with a drag. We tried to minimize EM profile. We turned off what we could. We let the night hold its own dark. Janet called and told us not to feed them. Terry taught me to mask the booster rhythm by using decoy low-output pulses. It helped, briefly. My curiosity is a lever. It has long pried at me. There is a quiet kind of scientist in me. Watch, record, learn, fix. It is the same urge that had once made me check a fire line twice. I rationalized my transgressions as care. I am careful, I said. I am doing observation. But curiosity is a heat, and heat draws. One morning, a series of automated emails slid under my account like a ghost thread. They were from Bryce's address, bpeterson@projectfrequency.org, signed off at odd hours with subject lines that read like a man leaving footnotes to his own life. From bpeterson@projectfrequency.org. Subject: Final night protocols. Do not override. Timestamp: 2023-08-09 2212 PST. Hello. If you have reached this, protocol requires you be reminded of last resort measures. Do not trigger the horn unless evacuation is impossible. Do not use the pulse generator except as specified. Single activation, follow-up lockdown. The generator will produce a field broad enough to disperse a cluster temporarily, but will also increase attractor activity for up to 72 hours. Use only if life is immediately threatened. Record everything. We will not be able to respond quickly. P will send automated follow-ups. B. Peterson. That email is a small document of love and fear, like a bottle with a note folded inside. It tells you a lot about the problem. There is a tool meant to save you that also feeds what it saves you from. We were warned. We wrote it down on the sticky notes beside the lantern. We taped them to the ladder and spoke about it like an absurdity. The generator that gives to kill. Stanley had ignored one such command. His final footage shows he thought he could handle it alone. Bryce's later emails are more and more apologetic, scientific, and human at once. There are fragments of his voice in the logs, raw as recordings. From bpeterson@projectfrequency.org. Subject: Field Notes, Entrainment Anomaly. Timestamp: 2023-07-15-1402 PST. Team: We are observing attractor behavior that deviates from expected spectrum mapping. The subjects exhibit delayed withdrawal and, in some cases, approach following low-level harmonics. There is an apparent preference for repeated, structured EM signatures. Hypothesis: reinforcement loop created through continuous monitoring. Proposal: implement adaptive dampening. Reduce station LED signature. Monitor for antler motif signals. Bryce: there was compassion in those notes. He was trying to fix what had become too large. We clung to those notes like a map drawn by someone who had started to see the thing they were trying to contain and had also begun to understand the cost. The visitors, the research team, arrived together like scientists in a caravan. Dr. Chen with a laptop bag bristling with instruments, Webb with a DSLR, Rodriguez with notebooks that never left her hands. They wanted data. They wanted to see the phenomenon as if it were a natural curiosity that could be recorded, exported, submitted, and then turned into a paper. They meant well. They meant to help. They did not understand the sound of the night. We set up arrays along the ridge on their advice and Terry's patience. We labored for days calibrating, counting the blinks of the LEDs until they were a pattern so faint they almost ceased to be there. We told ourselves we were doing the right thing. And then the reading spiked. The arrays wrote little jagged confessions across their screens. Approach, dwell, return. We watched in the lit cabin and felt small, like children watching the tide come in. There are days I can recall like sharp bones, and others that blur into fog. The days when the team left the arrays open because they wanted a continuous feed are sharp. The logs show we were collecting more data than ever. The logs show a confidence that reads now as arrogance. In the gaps between the data, in the notes no one wanted to publish, is the real thing. The creatures adapted. They started to mimic patterns. If the booster pulsed in a specific rhythm, a pair of them would move in step with its cadence beneath the pines. Once we noticed that they responded to pattern, we became the instrument of their learning. Each of our fixes taught them a new beat, and each new beat seemed to invite an additional measure of presence. On the night they came for the tower, everything had been a kind of rehearsal. We had been warned about the pulse generator. It was the size of a travel chest, tuned to release a broad electromagnetic pulse that would scramble neural electrochemical signals, if those signals were biological, and scramble sensor arrays themselves. It was a last resort deterrent, a bright and dangerous promise that a single click could reset a field. The manual was short, one activation only, one hope, then isolation. Terry argued to bury it and wait for extraction. We use it in the wrong hour and we amplify the chorus, he said, hands flat on the table as if pressing down the panic. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to keep my hands clean. But when you are listening to something outside the door calling your name, the same cadence as your watch ticks, it's very easy to imagine that the only ethical thing to do is to hit the switch. The final night is a sequence of minutes I keep replaying in my head like a looped film. I will try to be precise where I can. It's a long way down to the morning and a shorter way to panic. 041. A soft knock at the base of the tower. A single knuckle rap. I donned my jacket and peered through the slit. Nothing but trees and a smear of backlight where the boosters reach. I counted to 30 because it is what you do to give yourself time to decide. 102. A second round of knocks, this time a voice, broken by distance and the way the forest eats light, calling, "Hunter." It says my name like someone checking a list. 135. The air shifts. The sweet rot climbs the ladder rungs and into my lungs. It is like breathing a perfume made of bad endings. 207. Static on the night mic. The monitors show a ripple moving along the ridge. The antler lights appear beyond the tree line, long, thin flashes that make a crown across the pines. I count subunits, 3 sets, then 2. 242. The generator chest hums in its case. I can feel the hum through the floor. I imagine, foolishly, the field it can make. I imagine a ring of white and the thing outside recoiling. I imagine safety. 301. The ladders buckle with weight. Something is testing every seam in the tower. The metal roof sings with the small scraping of something thin. The tower's secondary camera catches a silhouette that is wrong, a verticality like a man stretched beyond measure. Its head tilts and an antler catches the starlight. 305. Terry's voice on the auxiliary radio. Hold it. Do not. Static. Then, a pull of wind, like someone slamming a door. The radio dies. The locks behind the main door, patched and old, begin to give. My hands have become instruments of small, desperate measures. Rope, table, chair. Each thing I do is a note in their learning. I count to anchor myself. Count to 3, then to 7, then to 14. Counting is a prayer to order. A finger knocks through the hatch under the loft. Something small and precise scrapes the wood. It smells like lilies and rot. It knows the sound of my boots. The lights go. My watch stops. The LED on the booster blinks once and dies. The audio on the camera fills with a harmonic tone that is not noise. It's a structure, a message. I hit record because record is a ritual. The camera captures a shadow moving across the lens, and then, inches from me, something presses against the glass. The pressure is not solid, but like cold water. It molds against the pane of the window, and I see, for an instant, the antler silhouette matching the shape of a halo. I hit the generator. There is an awful, beautiful purity to turning the last option into action. It is like ripping off a bandage. The chest clicks, a slow, affirmative sound. The dial turns. The field blooms like a bloom of white tide, and for a moment the world tilts. The hum unspools, and the air seems to push back at the inside of my skull. I want to say it burned, but burn is a warm word. It was more like the air shouting and then laying down. For 27 seconds they surged backward, an accordion of motion, antler lights receding in a slow geometry. I counted the seconds. There is such comfort in counting. And I remember the weight of the generator's release like a punch to the chest. I remember thinking, absurdly, of Bryce's email warning that it would increase attractor activity for 72 hours. There is a rational part of me that notes the irony, and an animal part that thanks whatever algorithm of survival we obeyed for the pause. It did not end. It only bought time. When the field dropped, the world had changed in the way a tide changes the shape of the sand. The creatures were smarter. They had mapped a way onto the tower's seams. The first one pushed through the eaves where the metal met wood, a slither of wrongness that uncoiled like a hand. There was a sound like 100 dead bells when it found the hollow of the wall. I remember the pressure in the room, the way sound moved in small pockets. I remember thinking I could die because I was curious and I had not been strong enough before. I used the monitoring stations as defense in a way I had not intended. I routed the feed through the old siren system, only a quiver of sound, but it was a sound with structure. They rocked to it, leaned into it, then recoiled. It felt like using a weapon built from their own language. I was improvising, scaling my choices between maintain data and keep breathing. Each flinch was a compromise, a pulse to move them away from the door, a blank to avoid learning. At one point, I crawled between the radio and the main panel and found a note stuck to the inside of the casing in Bryce's handwriting. He had scrawled, "If you don't leave, then make sure someone knows what you did. We owe evidence." I laughed then, a small, stupid sound that tasted of rust. Evidence becomes a relic when someone is breathing wrong outside your window. Terry's last message came through the radio like someone dropping a stone down a well. "Hold, there's a helicopter on approach," he said. "Lines open, Janet coordinates." The line fizzed. A rotor thumped far off, far enough to be hope. Then the rotor cut. I do not know if they were turned away on purpose, or if the field met the blades and told them to go. The extraction was a rush at dawn that smelled of wet gravel and smoke. We were lowered by rope lines. The helicopter's skid, a bruised bit of metal in the light. Terry and I climbed into the basket, and I watched the tower shrink. I saw, for a beat, the way the trees leaned. The antlers caught the early sun and were a crown of thorns. They sealed the tower the next day. The sealants were surgical, bolts, foam, a tarp welded by engineers who had tried to contain more than a building. They packed the generator, took the arrays, catalogued the cameras. Janet stood near the vehicle, jaw set, a ledger in her hand. Her eyes were full of the cost of choices. "We did what we could," she said. "It was final and incomplete." In the aftermath, there is an official language that moves like a bomb. Reports. Containment breaches, adaptive attractor response, protocol revision. They wrote it all down with the exacting horror of people who learn to make a tragedy administratable. The official story we were given, what they let cascade into the press, was that an anomaly had been observed, that measures were taken, that the site was temporarily closed pending investigation. That is the thing bureaucracies do. They make the edges neat. But there are other documents. There are automated emails from Bryce's account that continued to slip into my inbox long after he had died. They came with subject lines that read like apologies left on a table. From b.peterson@projectfrequency.org. Subject: Thank you. Automated follow-up. Timestamp: 2023.08.12:06:04 PST. Automated. Hunter: If you are receiving this, the system has confirmed a protocol event. The automated monitors will continue to record for the next 180 days. They will also attempt adaptive dampening as per my last memorandum. You have my thanks for maintaining records and for choosing to record rather than expose. There is more to say, but this will be delayed. Please archive the raw footage securely. BP. Automated. I later learned that Bryce had died 2 weeks prior to my arrival. A name on a report, a face in a photograph, a chair at a desk with coffee rings. System. I think about how the sweet smell of rot clung to my clothes like a secret. There is a haunting in the technical reports, a note that the monitoring systems, now autonomous, continue to adapt their dampening algorithms. They will run periodic sweeps, learning from their environment, toggling outputs to minimize attractor response. Machines optimizing for safety can become something that learns. It's pragmatic. It is also an unsettling idea. The thought that a field designed to suppress might itself refine the language that once summoned the thing. I left a recording in the sealed tower. It's a snippet of the night, raw and unedited. Static, rasp, the count of seconds I used to keep my mind. If someone ever opens it, they'll hear me laughing at the end, a small, brittle thing. And they'll hear me say, before the mic went dead, "We listen and we learn. God help us if learning is our hunger." There is no theology in the files, no divine explanation. There is the sad calculus of men trying to measure what they do not understand, and the machines that only do what they are told. The lesson is simple and cruel. Some experiments change the environment at a scale that makes reversal expensive. We learned, and they learned, and the ledger balanced in a way that left people alive and with scars. I still count when things get too big. I count to order myself, to mark time against the thing that would unmake the solid feeling of existing. The sound of a booster LED blinking in some distant sealed vault is both comfort and an alarm now. A mechanical heart that could, if misread, call the wrong sort of attention again. When I think of the tower now, I see it sealed under tarps, a small coffin with vents cut for the monitors to breathe. The last image burned into my head is one of the automatics still blinking in cycles, the tiny lights an indifferent constancy. I imagine they hum notes into the dark, tiny, clean, and the forest listens. If you ever find yourself offered a job that pays in stillness, in isolation, in duty, think about what keeps frequency in the world. Curiosity is a kind of light. It reveals, it burns. Sometimes, if you are very unlucky, it will attract antlers in the dark. I filed my logs. I gave the recordings to Janet. She folded them into a manila envelope and put it in a drawer with a slotted lock. She looked at me like someone who had been given a child and a loaded gun. "No more lone posts," she said. "There's nothing good about the silence after." I still dream of the smell sometimes. It is as close to a memory as I have. A jar of flowers left in too hot sun, petals gone soft. In the dream, the antlers are only silhouettes. They listen like priests. They are patient. They know the rhythms. They count along when I do, as if to learn the last thing I give them, my number, my breath. The automatic monitoring continues. The data still rolls past surveillance screens in offices that smell faintly of printer toner and coffee. The system is quieter now, a lesson learned and a protocol set. For a while, that was enough. I took the Alberta lookout job because I needed to be invisible. I stayed because something in me wanted to name what watched back. I left because I could not, in good faith, hand the world a secret without a record. The records are dusty now, but they are there. People will read them with gloves on. And if they are diligent, if they respect the small lessons, they will avoid the temptation to pulse the night into a pattern it can learn. If they are foolish, they will think the lights are neutral, and they will blink them louder. I do not know which future is worse. I only know this. The wound of that summer stitches itself closed, but the scar it leaves is on the instruments now. The monitors listen and learn and do not sleep. They will continue to search for the frequencies that hurt and those that heal, and I hope, if hope means anything, that they will learn restraint. Sometimes I open my inbox and there is another automated follow-up from an account that should be quiet. The subject lines are perfunctory: status, monitoring; follow-up, dampening parameters, initial. They sound the way legal notices do, like a procedural kindness from a machine. Somewhere between the technical and the tragic, there is an email that ends with the words "thank you" and a human initial. I read them because they make the absence of Bryce less empty. The last line of one of those automated notes is a commandment I try to live by now. Record. Do not feed. Walk away when you still can. There are nights I still count. There are nights when I hear a sound in the city, a rasp against a metal scaffold, and my body wants to move toward it like a moth. I do not. I have learned the cost. The tower remains sealed, and the monitors continue. The creatures declined in numbers, and the field did its job for a time. In the long ledger of the project, there is an entry marked "Successful Attenuation" and another marked "Loss." They do not cancel each other out. I do not have a last neat line to end this on. The best I can do is mark the time and say who I was and what I did, and leave the rest to those who read the quiet logs. If you are ever asked to watch a lonely place, ask them what the little lights mean. Ask who pays the cost when the light keeps learning. Because after all that, after the generator, after the sealed door and the helicopter, after the automated emails and the polite reports, the thing that lingers is the taste of lilies gone wrong on your tongue when you wake in the dark, and name is whispered from the tree line. I still start counting. I will probably always be counting. I still start counting. The counting lives in small acts. The number of steps from my front door to the mailbox. The clink of cups in the sink. The way the floorboards creak and answer me in ones and twos. Counting is a promise to approach things in a sequence, to name them so they do not sweep me away. It is a superstition with a ledger attached. It is a habit that makes the world manageable for a person who has learned the cost of patterns. Life stitched itself around those habits. I found a flat in a part of the city that smelled of frying onions and wet asphalt, close enough to a bus route that I could pretend mobility mattered. I took temp work, small contracts that paid in cash and deadlines. Janet moved on to a different post with a team that refused her hands-off style. She sends postcards with stamps that peel in the rain. Sometimes she calls and speaks in the clipped surgical sentences she learned in fieldwork. Keep the envelope where I told you. Do not forward. Change your passwords. When she laughs, it sounds like someone testing a house for drafts. Documents accumulate. People want narratives. Institutional bodies want closure more than truth. Stories that end tidy, not scars that keep twitching under the skin. I answered questions twice, then declined. I signed forms that meant nothing and mean everything. Non-disclosure, archival release, waive this or that. Each sheet was a thin attempt to make the memory into paper, and to let the paper wear the past. The monitors blinked on in other places. New protocols were written. New field guides folded like prayer mats. The language of caution became a language of habit. And yet, the inbox still produces anomalies. A message arrives with a subject line so banal I recognize it before I open it. Follow-up. Attenuation parameters. FYI. I do not expect more than that. Inside there is a small attachment, a single file named b17raw.wave, and a note. We found this on a backup drive marked Bryce, Camp. Thought you'd want to know. The initial is not Janet's. I play the file in the kitchen, keep the sink running to give the sound somewhere to go. At first there is only wind and the low, measured hum of equipment. Then Bryce's voice, liminal and bright even in the rough cut. 1. Then static. Then a scuff of boot on gravel. Then 2. 3. Then the thin intake of air that I know as his habit when he steadied himself for counting. I recognize his numbers like a fingerprint. Halfway through the clip, something shifts, an answering cadence under the wind, soft and irregular, like someone learning the rhythm of another's footsteps. Not echo, there is intent behind it, the way a child tries to match a clap. The clip ends with a burst of interference and a sound like antlers rubbing the bark of a tree, faint as a far-off piano string. I stand in the kitchen with the freezer light as my sun, and listen until the file repeats itself and then again. The irritation that rises in me is unfamiliar. It tastes of paperwork I did not file, of a ledger page turned too soon. Who else had been there with Bryce? Who else had named him into the dark? I call the number that sent the email. System. Someone had been feeding the night and not telling the ledger. I cross-reference timestamps with Bryce's last known log. The sequences overlap. There is a stretch of time where the machine recordings continue after Bryce's recorder stops. Then, after a blank interval, the machine logs register a manual restart. The signature of a human hand is there in the inert electricity. Someone reached into the system. Hale watches me fold a printout. We ran it through our filters, she says. There are patterns in the data we cannot explain. Some of them match human-generated noise. Some of them do not. We thought you might be able to tell the difference. I can tell you who was there, I say slowly. I cannot tell you what they named back into the dark. She nods as if that is what she expected to hear. We found a name. She says it softly, like one should speak around fragile things. Bryce, and another, M. Keller. I feel, for reasons I cannot name, the room tilt slightly. My mind drags ledger pages to where they were last balanced and finds instead a loose slip with a name scrawled across it. M. Keller, the field technician who replaced a broken sensor in June, the technician who took night shifts 3 weeks before the incident and who had a temper about following protocol. Keller was a name I had not said in years. Where are they now? I ask. Hale shrugs. We have records of employment, and then nothing. The paper trail goes cold. People move. Phones are disconnected. Sometimes that's just the way of temp labor. She pauses, watching whatever decision I make behind my eyes. But there were entries from Keller on the drives. File manipulations, attempts to alter the attenuation recipe. It's like someone was trying to teach the dampening to do something it was not built for. My thumb leafs through a printout and stops at a line where a human comment is folded into automated script. If they mimic cadence, we can teach them to silence, MK. The rest of the note is a series of numbers and partial sentences. There is a certain cruelty in that we. It is the word people use when they imagine themselves holding power, like a lantern. Did Keller sign off on these? I ask. No. Hale gives me a look that contains every bureaucratic shrug. Unsigned entries, unsanctioned commits. Someone else approved them later, after the incident. Our logs show override signatures from a different account. A different account, I repeat, and the phrase tastes like someone renaming a wound. I take copies of everything. I do not trust boxes left in other people's custody. I walk back into the light with the drives snug in my bag like small dead things. The city presses against me, full of noise and neon and lives I do not belong to. I count steps until I am 3 blocks away, and then stop, because the counting is a way not to be eaten by pattern. That night, I dream of the tower. In the dream, the monitors blink with perfect, indifferent time. Ants march across dials like a rumor of black. I hear a voice, Keller's perhaps, or the idea of Keller, teaching a rhythm. Listen, the voice says. They will answer what you ask. They will learn from you if you do not bind your hands. The antlers in the dream are close enough that I can see how the hair along their brows is an instrument, the way the world measures vibration. I wake with the taste of lilies again, and the shape of a new resolution forming as a bruise takes shape. If someone else had been there, if they had altered the algorithms, then the event at the lookout was not merely an accident of curiosity and solitude. It was an experiment, an arrogance, a failure. And failures are not always private. I call Janet. She does not pick up. I leave a message, succinct, careful, and then another that is less so. I send Hale a note that I will meet her at the archive 2 days hence. I pay close attention to which doors I lock and the way shadows pile against them like bad weather. The world insists on small acts of normalcy. I make coffee. I answer an email about a temp assignment that pays nothing but keeps a part of me functional. I count the spoonfuls of sugar into a mug because counting keeps me from following noises that might be learning me. 2 days later, I return to the storage unit with a list of questions and the weight of someone's nameless guilt in my pocket. Hale has produced a new file, a chain of correspondence between Keller and an account I did not recognize. The tone is clinical at first, then urgent, then apologetic. There is a dash of hubris, too, someone who thought themselves clever enough to coax something out of the dark in order to control it. The last message in the chain is a short one. They're learning faster than expected. Shut it down. Burn the samples. Signed, M.K. There is no sign of burning. There are only the files and the echo of instruction. Somewhere along the line, someone thought the right answer to a creature learning was to teach it a pattern. We tell ourselves that patterns can be benevolent. We dress it in words like attenuation and calibration, and then are surprised when the world takes the lessons seriously. Hale leans closer. We can flag the accounts, trace the approvals, she says. But people sign off on things for reasons that never make sense to other people. I think of Bryce counting into a dark that answered with antlers and the tremor in his voice I had not wanted to parse for fear he would slip away. I think of Keller's last note, the same hubris that thinks sound is a toy. I think of the monitors, those small, blinking devotions, which keep learning even when we are gone. We should make copies, I say. We should distribute them, put them where people who don't want the story to be simple will have to look. It feels for a moment like a righteous project. Like making light of a truth too sharp for polite consumption. Hale's face is unreadable. That means releasing things into the world, she says. If you do that, you know what they will call it. They'll call it inconvenient, I say. They'll call it necessary. They'll call it a breach. People with power will choose the name that suits them. My voice is dry. But if this happened because someone thought the night could be trained, then someone else could try it again. Or perhaps someone did, Hale replies. We sit with the silence between us, both counting small measures of courage. There are risks to scattering records, risks to burying them. There are also risks to silence. In the end, I do what I always do. I make a ledger and I follow its account. I copy files, encrypt like glove work, and distribute the copies in places where curiosity and skepticism overlap. I send a sealed packet to a researcher who publishes papers about bioacoustic anomalies, but who is not interested in glory. He has a habit of publishing data sets and disappearing. I slip drives into the mailbox of an independent archivist who runs a small collective that matches records to people who can ask the right questions. I send a note to an investigative journalist with no patience for institutional kindness. Each distribution is an act of trust, and each may be a catalyst for a different kind of hunting. That night, as I walk home under sodium lamps that hum like small distant monitors, my phone buzzes with 3 new messages. The journalist has replied with a single sentence. If there's something to this, meet me. I have sources who remember Keller. The researcher sends coordinates for a remote lab and a single question. If they learn rhythm, what will they name next? The archivist replies, Keep your head down. We'll cross-check and triangulate. Don't go to the tower. I stare at the last message until the light in the mailbox flickers out. Do not go to the tower. The sentence is not a law. It reads more like a prayer that tries to sound like advice. In the weeks that follow, small events gather like weather. A field team in another state reports odd cadences on a sensor array, patterns that repeat at non-human intervals. A rural sheriff's office logs a phone call about horns in the trees. An online forum picks up a thread about strange antennae in the woods, with grainy photos and a man who swears he can hear counting when he sleeps. The pieces shuffle into a pattern that is intolerable. The event at the lookout was not a single aberration, but a possibility germinating elsewhere. I begin, reluctantly, to attend the meetings these developments require. Not the formal committees with their buffered language, those I avoid, but the informal conversations in diners and basements where people with little to lose exchange leads. I meet the journalist in a muggy room full of cigarette smoke and old coffee. He is not the hero of a book. He is restless. He has a notebook full of names, a stubbornness like a tool. He wants to know why the monitoring continued after the last recorded human voice. Do you think it was deliberate? He asks. Did someone mean to teach them? I tell him about the line in Keller's note. I tell him about the files that show overrides and manual restarts. He writes it down without surprise. People always think they can translate the other into something their instruments understand, he says. They stop seeing what the other is doing and start training them to be a caricature. It's easier to manage a caricature. At night, I count my spoons and arrange them on the countertop as if that could ward off the hunger of pattern. I know intellectually that records spread and that light burns both cruelty and remedy. I also know that the world will give many answers and most will be inadequate. Then, in late autumn, an email lands with a subject line that smells of the old warnings. Urgent, possible breach at lookout B-17, recon team requested. The sender is a contact who normally deals in maintenance. The message is short. We have movement on the perimeter. Cameras picked up motion. No signature of animal in the database. Manual check recommended. My hands go cold. The envelope in the drawer with Bryce's recordings feels heavier. The ledger in my head scrolls with options. Call the sheriff. Send a team. Wait until daylight. Burn everything. But decisions are always accompanied by costs. The counting forms in my throat like a hymn. I do the only thing I can do with the kind of knowledge that does not comfort. I go back through the logs one more time. I listen for the pattern that answered Bryce's numbers and try to hear in it a grammar. The files hold it like a fossil. Rhythm, pause, return. It practices the cadence of the human voice until it has the architecture of imitation. But imitation is not understanding. It is a model, a shallow map. There is, toward the end of one clip, a frequency that slips beneath the notes, an undertone that the monitors recorded but did not classify. I isolate it, amplify it, until the speakers in my kitchen hum with a sound that is less like a voice and more like the memory of a voice. Beneath it, I swear there is counting, another count, but it is not in order. It loops and then jumps, like someone learning to speak by reciting a child's nonsense rhyme. I sit until the dawn has the color of bruised paper. When the sun finally breaks the night, it does so as if in deference to a new judgment. Everything continues, indifferent to my small acts. I pack a bag with cords, batteries, the drives I still trust, and the folded photograph of the tower. I lock the door and walk toward the bus stop, counting steps until the number feels sufficient to hold me in place. I do not tell Janet where I am going. I leave a note in her drawer, in a hand I hope she will read as apology and not as instruction. The city slides past, indifferent, and the road north smells of diesel and wet leaves. My counting is not a spell. It is not armor. It is, at best, an agreement between my feet and the world. Move in number, do not be eaten by rhythm. When I arrive at the edge of the forest, the first thing I notice is how small the tower looks from below. Distance collapses it into geometry, a pole, a box, a ladder. Up close, the scars are more human. The scrape along the metal near the hatch where someone tried to force it, a smear of old oil, a cuff of dried resin on the railing. Plants have crept over the foundation. The generators are gone. The door is sealed with new locks that smell of institutional freshness. A placard warns, in bureaucratic language, of restricted access. The sky is wide and dumb. Someone has been here since we left. Footprints run from the edge of the tree line to the base of the tower. They are small and precise, like someone who knew exactly where to walk. On the ground there is a pouch with a broken camera, and the smell of lilies when I lift it is there again, softer this time, as if the memory has been diluted. I set up a recorder and a small rig of microphones. The act of placing equipment feels like prayer and trespass both. I count to myself as I run cables. 1, 2, 3. The counting steadies my hands. The forest listens with a patience that is not human. In the distance, the antlers stand in silhouette where the trees open. They watch like stone priests. For a long while, there is only wind and the squeak of a rope settling. Then, as afternoon slides into a color made of cooling light, something moves at the tree line, slow enough to be patient, precise enough to be a study in intent. The microphones pick up a faint rhythm, a cadence that is not the same as Bryce's, but which fills the spaces between beats with attentive quiet. I put my finger to record, and the sound answers. The pattern turns itself toward me like a listener leaning in to hear a secret. I remember the ledger. Record, do not feed. Walk away when you still can. I do not walk away. I think of the drives in my bag, of Hale and the archivist and the journalist who stitched this web together without knowing how dangerous a thing curiosity could be. I think of Bryce's last breath of counting and how it might matter if someone is still learning to echo him. So I sit, I record, I count. The creature, or whatever name suits it, counts back. When the tones coalesce into the semblance of a number, I feel my chest cinch in the way hollow places do when cold water finds them. The sound is not human, and yet the punctuation of its rhythm is unmistakable. It arranges the pulses like a student arranging pebbles to spell a message it cannot yet read. One, I say aloud, because voice is a way to call a thing by its shape. There is a rustle from the trees. The answering sequence repeats, not as mimicry, but as inquiry. It attempts the cadence, falters, then returns with patience. My recorder is a mercy and a danger. It is proof and an invitation. I know the ledger, the commandment that lives in email footers and whispered by exhausted colleagues. Record, do not feed, walk away. I keep my hand away from the attenuator controls. I do not pulse the night with a test frequency. I do not play back Bryce's voice or offer up the clipped clip that taught the machine to listen. Instead, I let the forest ask its question, and I let myself, for once, be on the receiving end of an answer that is not mine to rewrite. When the sequence runs long enough to be a conversation, we are no longer two separate things. The pulses interleave. They learn to make space for each other's breath. For a sliver of a moment, the world feels less like an experiment and more like a communion. Then, as if remembering itself, the pattern spins and adds an extra integer that is not in any human counting I know. It is not a mistake. It is a discovery. I write it down in the logbook. Observation 11/ non-sequential response pattern. Possible imitation of learned cadence with novel insertion. No distress. No physical approach detected. Recording attached. It is dry, and yet my hands shake when I sign my name. The ink runs slightly, like something crying through paper. I put the drives into the pouch and close the zipper. Outside, the trees keep their counsel. The antlers are poised like question marks. I know what the ledger says. I know the sensible thing to do would be to walk away and let the record sit cold in a storage unit until someone else with more courage or less conscience finds it. But the journalistic itch that brought the copies into the world is not satisfied by prudence. It requires witness. I pocket the pouch and begin the long walk down the trail, counting quietly as if each number might keep the pattern from learning too much from me. I look back once, and in that quick motion I see something move between trunks. Not a thing of terrible size, not a hunting shadow, but the suggestion of a neck angled like an antenna, the outline of antlers lifted in a gesture that almost, for a second, resembles blessing. I do not know whether what I have recorded will save us or damn us. I only know the ledger. Record. Do not feed. Walk away when you still can. I have always been terrible at the last commandment. The city swallows me up again. Its lights a different kind of watch. I send the files to 3 places I hope will handle them like scalpel and not like spectacle. I send a message to Janet that contains no instructions but a confession in the shape of data. Night after night, I listen to the recordings in the small unlit room that is my flat. The patterns that answered Bryce are different now. They have learned the syntax of human pause and the way a human breathes before a name. Sometimes, when sleep thins, I think I hear them counting under the hum of the city. Not because the creatures are here, but because the record has become part of the background of things that have been seen and named. Then, on a morning made brittle by frost, my phone rings with a number I do not recognize. The voice on the other end is steady, measured, not the hurried cadence of a field tech, but the calm of someone who thinks bureaucracy is a shield. "We need to talk about your files," the voice says. "Someone has accessed copies you distributed. There are parties interested. We think you should come in." There are 1,000 ways to decline. There are 1,000 reasons to stay silent and let the seeds of anything rot in darkness. I look at the photograph of the tower and the note that says in Bryce's hand, "Do not let the lights teach them." My thumb traces the ink until it is soft. "Where?" I ask. The voice gives coordinates that angle toward a place with windows like eyes. There is a tone in it that suggests this meeting will not be gentle. I feel the count hollow in my bones. 1, 2, 3. The ledger turns. The world asks its question again. I pack the drives and the logbook and the photograph. I fold the photograph with the care of someone holding a small, dangerous thing. I lock the door and leave only the counting to keep the apartment company. Outside, the day is sharp as a blade that sorts truth from rumor. I begin to walk toward whatever verdict the city wants to hand me, and with every step, the counting grows less like a habit and more like a ritual. It is not protection. It is documentation. It is the last human thing I can think to offer before systems and people and curious things in the dark decide how to answer. The antlers, wherever they are, remain patient. The monitors blink. The ledger of small lessons waits at the edges of files and in the backs of envelopes. The world will make of what I have done what it will. I can only choose which paper I hand to memory and which I lock in my pocket. I step into the street and let the city count me in.